Okay, we are now recording and ready to start tonight's webinar.
Okay, let's go. All right. Well, welcome everybody that's listening in and watching at home or where you might be. I'd like to say this is Citrus Heights Water District's first venture into a virtual online class for WaterSmart classes. So we're looking forward to this new format. And we would like to let you know, as Cheryl mentioned, this is being recorded so that you can view it later. Again, my name is Rex Muir. I'm the Water Efficiency Supervisor over at Citrus Heights Water District. And we will be holding more classes in the future. And you can go to our website, chwd.org. And go to the scroll down to the events page and look for upcoming classes, which we have another one scheduled for this Thursday, June 11th. So just go to our website and you can get updated on all of our future classes. I want to mention one thing, and that is we do have some programs for our customers, which are for both indoor and outdoor. The first one is our indoor rebates. We have rebates for our high efficiency clothes washers, and we have which is $50, and we have a rebate for ultra low flush high efficiency toilets, which is $75. So go to our website at chwd.org and you can find the information there. One more thing, and that is our water efficiency reviews for your outdoor gardens and lawns. We can come out there and check your current system and see how it's running, make some recommendations on how to get better efficiency with your current system and not just ripping everything out. We won't fix anything, but we will give you hints and some pointers as to make it better and more efficient. So welcome everybody. The raffle. I want to mention the raffle. So we do have a weather-based smart controller that we're going to raffle off randomly to one of our customers that is listening tonight. This is a wonderful smart controller. It can be used through your smartphone, your Droid or your Apple phone, or it can be programmed manually. So it's got a wide range of users, so to speak. It's not too fancy for a basic user that just likes a mechanical setting. So we're going to raffle that off at the end, and the winner will be notified through phone or email. So I just want to welcome everyone. I know I probably jabbered too long. My apologies, Cheryl, but you're in for a treat. We have Cheryl and Martine here tonight to talk about the basics of the groundwork for creating your green plan. So take it away, Cheryl.
All right, Rex, thank you very much. And I would like to ask you, I see that we have Rebecca Scott joining us. Would you like to introduce Rebecca?
Yes, Rebecca Scott is here. She will be manning the chat room, so to speak. So if we do have any questions that we'd like to post, I urge you to go to the chat box and type in your question, and we will answer those. I do believe we're going to circle back and answer those, but we will pause at some point to answer some questions. So
great.
Welcome, Rebecca Scott. My apologies for not introducing you.
No, that's good. Thank you very much, Rex. I appreciate it. So thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Cheryl Buckwalter, and the name of my company is Landscape Liaisons. I am a landscape designer, consultant, as well as an educator, as you can tell. Here I am. But also, I'm a certified landscape irrigation auditor, as well as a qualified water efficient landscaper. And also, I participate with the Association of Professional Landscape Designers. And I am currently the Advocacy and Sustainability Chair for the APLD board here in the Sacramento region. So here's Martine.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Martin Carrion van Rijn. I own Landscape Symphonies, and I'm a landscape designer and contractor. Also have several certifications for water-wise landscaping, like with QL, WWLP, Eco Landscaper, and I do serve in several board positions for the Association of Professional Landscape Designers at the state level and for the Sacramento district. I serve both as treasurer for both of them and co-president for the Sacramento district at the moment.
Great, thank you, Martine. So let's start with what we're going to talk about tonight. In order to start making your green plan, we have some things to cover for this part one this evening. As Rex had mentioned, we'll have another presentation on Thursday evening. And but for tonight's presentation, as well as handouts, they all will be available, as you can see that on the screen, at the Citrus Heights Water District's website on the events page, okay? So all these principles and practices, all these handouts and the presentations themselves, as well as the recording of this presentation, will be on the Citrus Heights Water District's website. So tonight we're going to start with considering the principles. What principles do we need to keep in mind when we're designing and putting together our green plan? And there are steps to take for success, and that has to do with evaluating your site and assessing it, as well as asking a lot of questions, as you'll find out from Martine soon. And then we will talk through the steps to actually create your green plan. It all begins with beginning with the end in mind, because we want to think in the beginning where we want to be at the end of this process, which really never ends. Landscapes are alive and change, right? But we do want to think about the river-friendly landscaping principles. And as you can see them, there's this wheel on the screen that talks about these 7 principles, that each one of these are taken into consideration whenever we are designing, installing, or caring for our landscapes. And as it says here, this bullet point, keep watershed approach in mind. What does that mean to us? We are in the Sacramento region. There are all kinds of creeks and streams and rivers around us. And basically our landscape in itself functions as a watershed, meaning that whatever rain falls on it, irrigation water and so forth, it can run off, as Rex was talking a little bit about before we got started today. And so whatever we do in our landscape can end up in the waterways. And so we do want to keep that in mind, because we can have either negative or positive impacts on that. I also wanted to just speak that what a river-friendly landscaping means is that it is functional. Our landscapes want and need to have a purpose. There's an intended purpose for everything. Use our resources wisely. Use water, electricity, and so forth wisely. We want a diversity of plants, which I'll talk about in a little bit about, because we want to support garden life, okay? Sustainability is important, meaning our landscapes can sustain themselves, but these days we also think about regeneration, and river-friendly landscapes go beyond sustainability because they continue to perform, they continue to create habitat and so forth. And of course, we want beautiful landscapes, year-round interest, and like I said, provide food, water, and so forth for our habitat. So I'm going to touch base about the steps to create your plan. And one thing that I do want to mention that Rex did in the beginning is Rebecca is going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions along the way, please go into the chat box and type your question. We will pause a couple of times just to remind you to enter your questions, and then we will be reviewing them at the end. So just a little reminder about that. And if we aren't able to answer everyone's questions, then we will address that probably by having a Q&A handout that we can put up onto the website. So let's get started then. Steps to creating your green plan. So why create a plan? Well, as you can see, it's going to help you get organized through thoughtful planning. What is it in your landscape? Are you starting a new plan? So you want a clean slate starting over? Or are you renovating or just, your existing landscape and just want to make some changes? And so you want to think about what you're going to keep and not keep and incorporate and so forth. Martine will talk about that. Of course, protect our investments. It's really important to follow the steps to creating your green plan so that we don't make mistakes along the way. That's not to say sometimes we do, and that's when we're flexible and we just reassess and figure out another solution. Also, we want to create a plan so that we can stage our installation. We know what our schedule is, we figure out what our budget is, and over time, we can either install it at one time or over time install our landscape in phases. And then of course, gives us an opportunity to think about the team. Who is the team that we want to assemble? There are many, many resources in the Sacramento region, but you want to ask yourself, are you going to do the work yourself? Are you going to hire people? Do you want just a consultation? I say just, but a consultation is really important. And I encourage you to think about how much work you want to do or don't want to do. And so there are all of these organizations that are available to us in the Sacramento region. So when we're thinking about who will design and install our landscapes and so forth, we next want to think about how to start assessing ourselves and our family. Try to be realistic about what is your budget? What can you afford, or what do you want to invest in this project? And then ask your questions. Is this my temporary home? Am I going to be here forever? What lifestyle and life stages am I in and my family? And then Martine will talk more about assessing all of these things that you see here, your needs and wants. So he'll talk more about that. And then the landscape styles. So in this assessment, what's the style of your home? What colors do you like? What theme do you want to have? You can have formal, you can have a Mediterranean style, you can have any style landscape you want for any size landscape. We just want to select the right plants, the California native plants and others that are appropriate for our region. So, and our climate conditions. So we want to learn more about plants, select them, place them properly, learn to care for them, and think about these styles. What do you like? So moving on.
Thank you, Cheryl. So next, I will speak about all the, there's a document that I prepared a few years back where I wanted to show all my clients and explain to them what it's involved in doing an actual design. Briefly, you could almost determine it that is basically, it is divided in two. You have information about the site, what is possible in the site, and even like, for example, you have cultural requirements like zoning, homeowner associations, easements, setbacks. All of that information is off the site that you actually really need to consider and need to find out what it is for your location. There's also, like what Cheryl was saying, what is your style? Your style is going to be defined in many ways by the type of hardscapes that you have, the type of materials that you have. But then there's also the aesthetics. And the aesthetics, they're defined, there's what I call universal aesthetics, where there's balance or focalization of interest, where you have like a focal point in your garden. You want to pay attention to that. One important thing in regards to that is to not have too many of them, because you really want to have at least maybe one, two, maybe two, depending on the situation. Also, simplicity is very important. Then you have rhythm, proportion, unity. In this document, which will be provided to you in the handouts, I will go later on. I will expand on every subject, so you will understand a little bit better what I mean by that. The other important aspect of aesthetics is what kind of styles, and then what is are you intending to use the space for? Because that's also very important to consider when we're thinking about your landscape, your design. Are you going to entertain? What is your family structure? How many people? Do you have kids or grandkids? Are there pets? Do you actually interact with the outdoors, or is it more passive? Do people spend, there are people that spend a lot of time outdoors and other people that don't. What are your preferences and all of that? So one of the next steps after considering all of those things is to actually, what Cheryl was saying, is to ask yourself, what are you going to use the landscape for? This is, during this presentation, we're going to be following a design that I did with the river-friendly principles, but also with the aesthetic principles that I was just mentioning before. And therefore, I always prepare a questionnaire. There will be a handout for you on the questionnaire, of a questionnaire, but this is the questionnaire that I had for my client for this particular job. So basically, what she wanted to have was basically a place where she can entertain her kids when they come back home. There was basically not much in that place. She wanted it to be sustainable. She was very interested in sustainable, and she wanted flagstones, but she also wanted a meditation space and other items like that. So this is just the questionnaire that we had for this particular project. Another thing that is very important to gather is, like what I was saying before, is information, legal information of the site. What are the regulations? What are the building codes? Because they change by county, city, or state. Also, there's some restrictions from homeowners associations. So it's very important for you to gather all of that, because that is actually really going to determine a lot of things that you are able to do and where. Another important thing is here we have a slide of basically, I believe it will be in the handouts. You will need something like this to put all the information from your site, because we will need to gather a lot of the information of what is actually there. Because again, that will determine a lot of what is possible, because different sites don't have all the same possibilities. They don't have the same soil, they don't have the same exposure, or they don't have the same terrain. So all of that will need to be gathered. There will be another handout. Another important thing that we'll need to have is our guideline for what is for river-friendly practices. This will be in the handouts again. So you will be able to check and see if you are forgetting something. You can go back to here and see if you have done something properly. If you follow this list, basically you will be getting a lot of the information that you will really need to do your design, to do your project. I will stress that your design will be only as good as the amount of information and the quality of the information that you gather. So it's really important to gather all of that information first. So that's why we were getting all those documents. The next phase is, how are you going to actually go and start assessing your site? It is very important to have information of the measurements of your property and of your house, because that is really going to determine the whole layout and how precise it is going to be. And that precision, like what I was saying before, will determine how good your design is. So it's really important to put everything to scale. So if you have a ruler, like you want to do an eighth of an inch scale, 1 inch, 1/8 of an inch would be basically 1 foot. So you can take that consideration. Or if you want to do 1 to 4 quarter inch, a quarter inch would be 1 foot. So it's important to know all of that. So one of the requirements you would need to have is a grid graph paper, and then you can start putting all the information on there to scale. Another important thing to have is the arrows, the orientation, where is north, because again, that is going to determine where the sun is. What are the tools that you need to actually go and take all that information from your site? Here are some of the tools that I use. On the top left corner, I have a hammer and stakes, because those stakes help me hold measuring tapes, because tapes are not all, it's not that easy to put them in one place. So I use that. Then there is a soil probe. I use a spray paint because that also helps me mark things. There's different kinds of measuring tapes. I have here a 300-foot tape, a 200-foot tape, just a 25-foot tape that you can use for different methods, for different measurements when you're doing your assessment, your assessment of your site for dimensions. I also use some string to actually put some straight lines and help me with that. Down below on the bottom left corner, I also take soil tests. So those are soil test tools that I have. There's a probe, and then I always have like a little place where I can put the soil. There's a place where I can do a soil test and all of that. And another very important thing is to actually have drawing tools, so that what we were saying, you can have everything and put everything to scale, because that drawing is going to be very important to have it properly drawn. More tools would be, I would really recommend to have a camera, because that camera is going to really give you a lot of information that, even though you know your house, looking at through a camera's eyes, you actually look at it very different. It will also allow you to see certain things, gather some information, and have it right there in front of you when you're going and reviewing your whole project. Another important element to have is tracing paper, some color pens or pencils, because it's going to be very necessary when you actually start to develop the plan, because that's really, it gives you that flexibility and also allows you to have a lot of fun. Another important tool that I really cannot stress more is to have a laser level. That is to actually take measurements of the elevations of the site. Because as we will see, Rex was mentioning that before, in terms of water, it's very important to know what the slopes are, because that will affect everything from irrigation, planting, and many other aspects. So it's really important to have those measurements which you can take with the laser level. One of the ways I always start with a project is I always try to get what is called a plot plan or a base plan. You can get this information most of the time from building department, from the city. And what is important here is you get the dimensions of the property. You also get the orientation, and then you have the location of the site, of the house, and then you have any easements or setbacks. So that's what we were talking about before, gathering legal information. So this document gives you a lot of that. On the project that we're showcasing tonight, what I did is I had the previous one was the actual plot plan, and then what I did is I redrew it, and then I went outside and remeasured everything, and I found out that actually the measurements in the plot plan were not correct. So I had to revise it, and then from there I could start with the plan. As you can see here, this was the line that originally said that where the plot plan for the property was, but this was the actual property. So as you can see, it's really important to revise your measurements, and again, it's very important to put everything to scale. Here I have some pictures of this project. This is the front yard. Again, here helped me to look at it later when I was trying to work on the design. It was very important to see where the front door is, where the downspouts are, because that will help me also determine where the water will run. As we will see later in the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about that. It's very important to take information where the valves are, where the point of connection is, that's where the water comes in and where you're going to connect your irrigation, how many valves you have. Then it's also, like what I was saying before, important to have a picture of your front door, because in a way that's kind of like the purpose of the front yard, is to actually get you to the front door. Here we have other pictures from the backyard, trying to understand what the space is, what is existing. On the top right corner here, as you can see, there's another downspout, which was very important for me, which we will see later. And then again, I have more pictures of irrigation in the back.
Yeah, and Martine, I can't say enough about the importance of taking photos before, during, and after throughout the project, because that's documentation that I think is priceless to have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you. So as we move into, you know, our site assessment and more about the conditions, climate is very important. What's going on your property? And here in the Sacramento region, we follow the Sunset Garden the Western Sunset Garden books, sunset zones. And we have 7, 8, 9, and 14. And you can look in the beginning of the Western Garden book and have descriptions about the nuances and the slight variations that there might be between each of these zones. But we want to figure out about the sun and the shade and wind. Wind is very important. I used to live in Elk Grove, and I could almost set my watch by the, you know, the breeze that would come in, the delta breeze that would come in late afternoon every day. So very important, because that affects plants and how much water they need and so forth. And we're just assessing, you know, trees, like I said before. What do we want to keep? What's important to us? And as Martine said, what is our water source? Do we have existing irrigation or not? Grading is so important, because it's something that you will want to address now. If you have ponding water somewhere, you don't want to ignore that. And again, it might be something that you want to call in a contractor to help you assess what the situation is. This is a reminder also to enter questions into the chat if you have any. And I also wanted to mention that some of the slides, you may see that there's a good amount of text on them, just like this one. We do that for webinars such as this. It's something we're trying because we know that this presentation will be online at the Citrus Heights Water District on the events page later on. And so we want there to be enough content for you to be able to put together what the message is, just in case you're not able to listen to the webinar itself, okay? So when we're thinking about sun exposure, take another copy of that base plan or plot plan, or take tissue paper, as Martine was describing, and lay it over that plot plan. You want to start thinking about what's north, you know, because if the front of your home is north facing, that's the section that receives the least amount of light. And so you will want to select plants that can tolerate less sun versus plants that are on the west or the south facing side of your house, where they will receive a lot of sun. And then consider, you know, are there obstructions? Does a neighbor have a big tree that's going to provide a lot of shade or not? Keep in mind, if you will, that next to the street, landscapes can be very, very hot, especially if there aren't street trees and shade trees and so forth. So keep that in mind, as well as heat. You know, when sun hits windows, it can reflect heat back onto your plants. And I've seen plants get burned just from reflections. So on this copy of the plan, now you're going to start thinking about what areas and marking what areas in my landscape are in the sun all day long, part of the day. You know, what's the important or the significant vegetation, plant material, trees that we have, and how much shade do they give underneath their canopies? So outline that on your plan as well. And then of course you're noting structures, you know, the footprint of your house, walls, and so forth. And also the direction, the predominant direction of the wind.
It's trying to connect what Cheryl was saying with the project we're showcasing here. As you can see, this is, you have the base plan, and then this is basically what I went through the study, where I have like the sun was actually in this direction, and then you have like existing trees, which are here. which actually that's north, so they're really not providing a lot of shade. But this tree here on the front yard actually was quite large, and that basically, even though that is south, it's actually providing a lot of shade. Then there's what you have like morning sun, and then you have afternoon sun. And if you really look at the houses was looking north, so just on that side it's going to be shady, but then on this area here there's going to be a lot of sun. Another very important element to consider, and in your while you're doing your design or your landscape, is actually the physical properties of the soil. It really is, like, in so many ways, a healthy landscape starts with the soil. Now, there's two elements to the soil that we need to really pay attention to. The first one is the texture. The texture, basically, you have three elements that determine it: is clay, silt, and sand. And the percentages of that will actually determine what type of soil you have. Why is this important? This is important actually for the irrigation, because all of these soils have a certain amount of, they can take some certain amount of water, but it is really important to really know what type of soil you have, because it will help you a lot in to make a lot of decisions later on. Another important element that you want to consider is the structure of the soil, because, for example, the texture, you cannot change it, but the structure of the soil, you can actually change. We can change it by adding organic matter or adding biology to the soil. And why is this important? Because this is the part that is alive, that is healthy. And this actually is the part that actually can absorb and retain water, create space. So this is the part of what Cheryl was saying, watershed approach. The idea is we're trying to create a sponge so that a lot of water comes in there. And how is that sponge created? It's really a big part of it is creating a healthy ecosystem. So really, like, the foundation is that healthy ecosystem of soils, of the soil structure. And in other presentations, we will actually go a lot more in depth into how you can do that, but this is really, really important. So in some cases, how can you find this out? It is good to actually do a soil test, send it to a lab, and find out what are the conditions of your soil, so that you can find out how to improve it, the structure of the soil.
Thank you, Martin. So as Martin was talking about water on our property, now granted, we can't really watch water on our property in the form of rain right now, but perhaps you have observed it before. So we do want to take a copy of our plan and start marking down, where does water flow onto our property? Hopefully it's not coming from a neighboring property, but maybe we have a section when it rains, it hits our roof and then flows off into an area where it seems to be ponding. Maybe there's a low spot. So maybe that could be an area for a rain garden, which we'll touch base on. And so I also encourage you to dig a hole, actually dig a hole, put water in it, and let it sit and measure it or time it so that you can figure out how long the water, it really takes for the water to drain. If it's sitting there after 2 days, then some serious consideration about how to improve your soil needs to be done. I will also add that, you know, we had a question about where to get a plot plan from the city, and there's different ways. Sometimes it's the planning department, the tax assessor's office. You can get a plot plan. I know sometimes when I've actually purchased a home and when I close on it, in the documents that I receive, I have a plot plan there. Sometimes I've hired a surveyor to come out and do that. It just depends on what your particular needs are. So the next slide then, let's talk about the water management a little bit more. So as you can see on this plan for Martine's project, Up near the top, it's kind of faint, but there's these little dotted lines. Maybe Martine can point to that for us. That's where a downspout from the house comes in. Thank you. A downspout from the house is directed to that depression in the soil where water can collect, but not stay more than a couple of days at the most, so that it can soak into the ground. Because we want water to slow spread, sink, and stay on our property. And so here's just a couple of examples of directing a downspout to a dry creek, cobble bed, or else a rain barrel. There's also a great resource. It is in the state of Washington about rain gardens, but I encourage you to look at this resource because they talk a lot about planning, soil, how to measure and lay out your rain garden. And they do have a great section on plants, but I would encourage you to use the resources that we will show you later for learning about plants that are great for our local environment and our conditions. But I do encourage you to take a look at that.
Irrigation. So there's a lot of things actually that we need to gather, a lot of information that we need to gather from our irrigation. Taking your base plan, it would be really good to actually mark where your water meter is, where does the water come from. It's very good to figure out what is the PSI, because the pressure that is coming in, because that will determine your irrigation system, how you're going to use it, what are the valves, what is the pressure that you're going to use. You need to know what type of controller you have, where it is, what kind of wires, how many wires you have. I've encountered many times that you don't have enough wires where the valves are, so you may need to bring in new wires. It's good to have all of that information, and it's very good to put it on the plan. If you have lawns, it's very put in where the sprinklers are, and what type of sprinklers there are, what size valves you have, how old is the system, what is the condition. It is really important, like what Cheryl was saying, start with the beginning, with the end in mind. You need to consider how much water you will apply. You will be applying in the end, how much water you're going to be using. And then you also need to know how much water your irrigation system is applying. So you need to figure out that out with the existing irrigation. And also it will help you to determine what you will do if you do any modifications to your irrigation system. Another part of the process, once you know where everything is very important to turn it on, figure out what is going on. Are there any breaks? If you have sprinklers, are they blocked? Are they clogged? Are they not working? Important to know which areas they are watering, because as we will see later, that really will affect the whole decision of actually planting and other things. So you can start to color the areas where each irrigation system is actually working. Another important element is to mark whether it's shady, whether it's sunny. Also, if you have any slopes, any severe slopes, because the irrigation, like what Rex was saying at the beginning, that is going to be very important. If you have a slope, you really don't want to have the same system that you have on a flat area, because it works very differently. The water is going to work differently on that area. What I was talking about here is like slopes and elevations for irrigation, but not only that. You need to figure out, like what we had at the beginning. We had the laser level taking all your elevations. It is really important to have those, because how are we going to work with them? Not only in irrigation, but also in terms of flow or of spaces and use, because this garden, of course, we want it to be sustainable and regenerative, but we also want to be able to move through it and experience it, right? So it's very important to have those elevations so that we can start to figure out ways on how to how to work with those transitions. And those changes actually they're going to improve the experience, and they're going to also improve the aesthetics of the whole landscape. So it's really important to start to consider where the elevations, and maybe what would the options be, or what you may be able to start doing. That really leads us into the next part of the presentation, which is really, once you have all of the information from the site, you have the soil, your irrigation, your exposures, what you want to do with the place, then you start to actually work a little bit on the plan itself. And this is what is called a functional bubble diagram. It's really like what it says here is broad strokes of what are the uses that you want to have for the areas. So here, for example, you have like this bubble where it says a screen or a patio, and the shape doesn't really matter. You're really just trying to assign a purpose. Cheryl was talking about purpose, and everything has to have a purpose. So you're really just assigning these areas, and then you're going to be able to see how they connect. And then you'll really start to connect the dots, because you will see you have all your information for exposure. So you will know if you have a patio there, you have the information of exposure, and you will be able to start to make informed decisions on what you're going to do with those areas. If it's patio, then if you're going to need to provide shade or things like that. Then also you're going to need to figure out a way how all of these areas are connected. So going to this project that we were talking about before, this was basically a little bit of what I call the bubble diagram. Of course, they're not bubbles, but what I was studying is basically we have, this is like a very big space. It's one space. That's what I could tell, what I read. And then there was another space here, but really this space here was a more intimate, was close to the house. So it really, like, that was calling for something more private and really more connected to the house. Whereas, for example, in the front, there was the idea there had to be an entrance. So this was a little bit of the study that I did for this project. The same goes with all this, we're going back to this, this slide, where, as you can see, this was really like, this was for me marking the flow of the circulation of what this site needed to have. I needed to get from here to there, and then there was this. So this was really the circulation of movement, how you would move in the space. And then of course here, although it's not visible here, you had that entrance.
So as Martine is talking about the space and the flow, we start thinking about materials that we are going to use. Existing materials we want to figure out, can we reuse them and so forth? And then we next go into creating access and paths and walkways. Next slide, please, Martine. So if you have a curved path, for example, it can slow your pace. It tends to make you want to feel that you can walk more leisurely and look at things. If you have straight paths, then that tends to make you want to quicken your pace, and you might use a straight path when you have a utilitarian use, like getting the garbage cans and so forth from the back to the street and so forth. There are many materials that we can use for our patios, pathways, and so forth that are referred to as permeable materials. And we will talk about that in much more in Thursday's presentation, but I wanted to mention it to you. So it just means materials that can allow water to soak in and around them, to go and soak in slowly into the soil.
So connecting that to what Cheryl was saying in the project that we are actually reviewing, this, for example, this is basically the layout. You remember there was the flow. So we have this flow, and then we have this flow going like that. But I wanted to make it fun. Also, I wanted to serve all the things that she wanted to have. Remember, she wanted to have like a meditation area. This is like a meditation ring. So there is a flow to this landscape, and then it connects to this more private area. Now, in terms of materials, all of these paths, these are just stepping stones, and all of this is gravel. So water will really just percolate there and really stay in the ground. And then this area here, there are pavers, where the water, even though it's not completely permeable, but the water does go in through the joints. So they're pavers set on sand, and that it really increases the permeability of the material. The next element that we need to start looking at is really is our plants. Besides all our tastes and all the plants that we like, this is the living part of the landscape. The hardscapes is right, like the solid, the structure of it. And then the softscapes, the plant is the living part. It's like when you paint your house, you actually start to bring life and give color and really bring it to life. Now, one very important thing is when you start to think of your plants, you need to start to think of them, what is their size in maturity. And so when you draw them, you need to put them at the mature size to scale, because that's really what is going to determine how many plants and where you're going to put them and what they're going to serve, what purpose they're going to serve actually, because they do serve a purpose. Plants do serve a purpose, providing shade or actually accenting paths or elements like that. Sherry will talk a little bit more about what is called right plant, right place, but that's something you already need to start considering. So you need to look at plants and look at just define the sizes. What are the mature sizes that you need to have? Another very important element when you're thinking about all your plants is what are their water requirements, because not all plants use the same amount of water. So it's really recommended that we start to think of separating plants into zones, or you have separate valves that are going to water very particular water, plants with very particular water requirements. For example, trees have different water needs than lawns or edibles, or you have pots that actually, they're very, very different. And then you have more California natives or more Mediterranean plants that they have very different water needs. So you really need to, when you're thinking of planting, of plants, you need to start to think of what are the water needs so that you can distribute them properly. In this plan, as we can see here, for example, what I did, all of these blue ones, they're low water. So all of these are low water plants. And then the green ones, they're moderate water plants. So when I was developing this project, I actually was already thinking, what are the needs of them? Although in some cases I wasn't able to put them all together for so many reasons, but I was already thinking in that direction.
And when you're thinking about spacing your plants, and very important, as we have learned in the last several years, is how important fire-wise landscaping is. And so here are some tips about that. Placing plants individually, which is called sparse planting, so that there's more space between them. Don't put plants right next to a deck, for example, and tall ones that can work as fuel ladders. And refer to CAL FIRE for a lot more information about fire-wise planting. Next, we're going to talk about placing trees. So when you're placing trees, and we had a great question about that, it's very important to think about where you're placing them, consider whether or not they are going to be underneath electrical lines. So visit pg&e.com. When you're placing a tree, you want to look up, look out, look around, find out what the mature size is. And also whether it's going to be deciduous. Is it going to lose its leaves in the winter? But yet, and it's on the west side of the house, and if that's the case, it will give you lots of nice shade in the summer And then in the winter, when it loses its leaves, it'll warm the house. So consider solar panels as well, and do not top trees. We will have more information about planting in Thursday's webinar, but we wanted to mention it here because relative to your plan, it's very, very important. Next slide is going to be about existing plants and new plants. So you can see on the right-hand side, this is a fringe flower or loropetalum. On the left-hand side, it is the same plant in the wrong place on a corner where there was a visibility issue. We want to make sure that we give plants enough room to grow to maturity. And if plants are in their optimum conditions, then you know, the right amount of sun, the right amount of water, and so forth, it will grow to maturity and be beautiful. Next, what's important in our landscapes is to think about color. Color is very important because it, you know, it makes us feel good, or it gives us different feelings and so forth. So makes us feel peaceful, sometimes agitated. Static color basically is unchanging. That means it's going to be something like a wall that's painted here. It doesn't change all the time. Transient color is another term that we use for color that changes throughout the seasons, and we get those from the plants themselves in general. So I want to pause here to remind people to enter questions into the chat. We're getting near the end of the presentation, and we want to be able to take more of your questions.
Thank you, Cheryl. So now that we have gathered all of that information and we really have all of those things to consider, it is really kind of leading to what our next workshop is, actually putting all of that into practice. So, but the first step is really creating a preliminary landscape sketch. So this is the part where you really get to have a lot of fun. So I generally use, for example, tracing paper to do draw a lot of little ideas. I have a drawing table, and it's also, I find it very important to find a place where that is clean, that you can actually really get to work, not be distracted, and you can just have fun, start playing with it. Another important thing to have is color pens or pencils, because they will help you highlight your ideas, or help you, like what we were saying before, the flow or the position of things. So it's really, have fun putting it all together. Going to the design that we were looking at, once I had the hardscape defined, then I started working on defining the plants. This was just the plant, really the sketch. So I was just positioning trees based on whatever I wanted them to do. I wanted, for example, a path to feel more narrow, or so that it feels more intimate, or I wanted the meditation area that I was talking about. I wanted to have filter light, to have a little bit of a feeling of a chapel. So you have that more intimate light coming in. So that's why I place, for example, all those these trees around them, so that you would have that element. And then you have another element here that it became really like more of a sculptural element. And then another thing that is important, you can start to define what are the qualities that you want. You have for the plants, you want them to look, what are the colors, what are the aesthetically, what are the colors, what are the textures, do you want scents, do you want what do you want from all the things that are happening in your garden? So this is a time where you actually start to put a lot of information in that.
And to wrap up here, we just wanted to show you a few of the great resources that are available to you in this region. So here at apldca.org, that's the Association of Professional Landscape Designers, there's this great workbook, basically. It's called the California Watershed Approach to Landscape Design, that you can download. It's free. Another resource is called the New California Landscape. And this is wonderful because it has 4 landscape designs, irrigation plans. There's 75 plant profiles that show plants throughout the year, what they look like, what their water needs are, sun, mature sizes, and so forth. Also irrigation tutorials. So it's just a great resource. And then just keep in mind that as your plan develops, we really want to think about the 7 principles of river-friendly landscaping. And so, as we said, there will be a lot of handouts available for you after this workshop, along with the presentation and the webinar recording itself. So keep in mind, June 11 at 6:30 p.m., Martine and I will be taking you into the next steps after the preliminary plan so that you can put your green plan together. Now, what kinds of questions do we have? Rebecca, do you see a question here?
Yes, I do. I have just a few for you, Cheryl, and also a comment that might help some people from Kelly. She noted that if you have some shade-loving plants that are under large trees, you might have a utility company that cuts the branches off, and then that will affect your shade-loving plants negatively. And then we have 2 questions from Viorica. I hope I'm saying that correctly. She wanted to know how you can get the plot plan from the city.
So I did answer that one along the way, but let me say that again, because it's a great question. I have gotten a plot plan sometimes when I've purchased a home and I get my closing documents from the mortgage company or title company. Also, I've gone to the city, for example, to the county assessor's office, tax assessor's office. They will have plans that they can look up. Also, planning departments or building departments sometimes will have them for you. You can also go to Google Earth to get an image, and there's a tool there where you can measure your site. But as Martine stressed, it's so important to check those measurements yourself. So I hope that's helpful. And then regarding, yes, the utility, especially where I live, I'm here in Cool, but I work throughout the Sacramento region. And we are preparing right now for our fire inspections because PG&E, there are public utility requirements, laws and so forth for prevention of fires. And so there needs to be certain distances between vegetation and the electrical lines. And if they come along and their contractor that they've hired to keep the trees a minimum of 10 feet away from the electrical lines, that starts changing the shade and so forth. Sometimes they will even take down trees. So that's why your planning is so important as you're considering where you're putting things, whether they need shade or they don't need shade. As I mentioned, sometimes you might get shade from a neighbor's large tree. Well, I've had a situation where it was a tree that ended up being very messy. It was a eucalyptus, so also a fire hazard. So the neighbor took down the tree and the clients were left with full exposure now, full sun yard, because the tree that they used to get shade from is no longer there. So I hope that helps to answer that question. And Martina, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, not in regards to that. I think you covered it all.
Okay, very good. All right.
Okay, so one more question also from Viorica. She wants to know if there are any rebates for redoing your front yard.
And Viorica, are you a Citrus Heights Water District customer? If you are, Rex can speak to that. If you're not, you could visit the Regional Water Authority's website at bwatersmart.info, bwatersmart.info. You can go there and find out who your water provider is. And there is also a resource there that lists the various rebates that water providers in this region offer. So Rex, do you have anything else to add to that?
Currently, we do not have a rebate for replacing your yard or your lawn, if you will. We have been using the state's website when they have funding, and that's saveourwaterrebates.com. That's the rebate. They have turf replacement rebates and some toilet rebates also that are linked to those to that site. So you can always check there. Again, it's pending state funding throughout the year.
That's great. And yes, so it's saveourwater.com. Is that right?
It's saveourwaterrebates.com.
Rebates.com.
Yes, and it's
Very-
ROUR. So saveourwaterrebates.com.
Okay.
Yep.
Very good. Thank you so much. And from what I understand, it's an easy process. So
Very.
that's great. Great. And so, yeah, Viorica is in the Citrus Heights Water District. That's wonderful. So if we don't have any more questions, Martine, do you have anything else to add before we close for tonight?
Not besides inviting them to really join us on our next webinar on Thursday, because it's going to be really putting a lot of this into practice. This one was a lot about gathering information, getting prepared, and the next one is really where the fun begins.
Great. Well, thank you. Anything else, Rex or Rebecca?
I would just like to say thank you to all of our customers and participants of the webinar, and being part of our first virtual online class. So thank you very much. And thank you, Cheryl and Martine. And Rebecca.
You're welcome.
And Rebecca.
You're welcome. Thank you all. Have a good evening and be safe.
Good night.